They say the forest holds no memory, that it renews itself every year with the falling of leaves and the turning of the seasons, swallowing whatever man carves into it whole. That may be true in most places, but not in Ashdown Hollow, not where I was sent. I was 39 when I took the job, single, quiet, a surveyor by trade and by nature, more comfortable with coordinates than conversations. I had done well enough for myself. I had charted old train lines for restoration projects, helped recover land titles from towns long dead, and even mapped forest boundaries when stone fences proved unreliable. I liked the work. It gave me a sense of direction, both literally and otherwise. It was October when the letter came. The light was already fading from the days. The trees outside my flat had gone brittle and red, and I spent most evenings in my study, sorting old field reports and tracing routes I would likely never walk again. The envelope was cream-colored, thick with the faint smell of smoke. There was no return address, just a sharp serifed emblem embossed in wax. One I didn't recognize, but which felt vaguely governmental. The letter itself was brief. Mr. Eldon Harrow, you are hereby requested to conduct a topographical boundary survey of Ashdown Hollow, an unmarked tract of woodland in the Northmore district. All travel arrangements will be provided. Compensation fixed, private, substantial. No publication or inquiry permitted. You are to travel alone. It was signed by a T. Bellamy, whose name appeared nowhere in any public or private registry. No contact number, no instructions beyond a set of coordinates scribbled in the margin. Ashdown Hollow. The name stirred something in the back of my mind, an itch I couldn't quite scratch. I couldn't recall ever reading it, but it felt familiar, like an old dream, half remembered. So I began researching. I scoured maps, modern, historical, even military, and most showed nothing. A few older charts from the mid-1800s hinted at something. A hollow, scrawled near the upper border of a forested area deep in Northmore. But it was faint, redacted almost, as if the place had once been penciled in, then erased. On one 1847 map, the area had been cut out entirely, the surrounding trees drawn over it. There were whispers though, a forum thread, a passing mention in a defunct blog about ghost towns, rumors of missing surveyors and unresolved land disputes. I even found a grainy photograph from 1911. Men in high boots and flat caps, standing stiffly beside white boundary posts, like pallbearers without a coffin. And always the same word. Forgotten. None of it really frightened me. If anything, it intrigued me. I have always had a fondness for things left behind. When I arrived at Wenscombe, I arrived in a damp drizzle that seemed to seep into my clothes. It was the end of the line, literally. The station had only one platform. It was overgrown and silent, with no signage, save a crooked, hand-painted board. The town itself was a collection of shuttered shops, a butcher, a grocer, and a moss-covered church steeple. The people that I passed didn't look up. A woman on a bicycle glanced once at me, but then pedaled away faster. A child watched from a window, hand pressed flat to the glass. When I arrived at the inn, I was given a room without being asked my name. When I inquired about Ashdown Hollow, the innkeeper paused, drying a glass with a rag that never seemed to get wet. Ashdown Hollow? That's not a real place, sir. But you have heard of it? He said nothing. That night, as I packed my gear under the flicker of an oil lamp, I heard something at the window. A soft tap tap. I pulled back the curtain. No one was there. And outside, the mist thickened, curling like smoke along the empty street. I left on foot the next morning. It was a 5-day trek into the forest. I followed old forestry paths, many overgrown and tangled. The trees grew tall and close, a tight tapestry of pine and birch, and something else I couldn't identify. Trees that don't appear in any field guide. They bend unnaturally, as if huddled in whispered conspiracy. After a while, I noticed the forest change. First, the moss thickened. It became a deeper green than I had ever seen. Then there was the quiet. The birds just stopped calling. The wind no longer rustled leaves, but sighed in patterns I couldn't understand. And by day 3, my compass spun erratically, the needle pulsing, then swinging east without reason. I recalibrated it and tried again. No change. On day 4, I found the first post, white and unmarked, driven cleanly into the earth. It was barely a foot high, standing upright in a patch of flattened grass, like it had been placed yesterday. I touched the wood. It was dry but not rotten, smooth and pale, as if it had never been part of a living tree. No bark, no grain, just pale silence. I found more markers beyond it, all arranged in a rough arc, each one exactly 100 feet apart. I mapped them carefully, feeling a growing unease settle over me. The air just felt thicker here, heavier. The wind stilled, and the birdsong vanished completely. With every step I took, the sense of being watched pressed in. Not followed, not hunted, just observed, patient and unseen. On the 6th night, I stumbled on something half buried beneath a twisted elm. A weathered journal. Its pages were soaked through, but the ink remained legible. Scribbled maps, survey notes in a neat but trembling hand. The sketches showed the same markers I was finding, circling the same points endlessly. The author never named themselves, but their fear seeped through the words. There is no border, only repetition. I have walked it 3 times now. It is always a circle. I try to leave markers, only to find them already placed. It remembers me. I feel it breathing beneath the soil. Another entry read, "It does not want to be mapped. It wants to be remembered." And then I saw him again, pale, eyeless, walking the line. I am not the first, and I will not be the last. That night, I dreamed of snow. A figure dressed in white moved through it. Not fast, not slow, but deliberate. Its hand traced the tops of boundary markers as if reacquainting itself with old friends. It had no face, no eyes, but it looked right at me, and I knew I had trespassed on something sacred. I woke to find the last page of my journal missing. Between the remaining pages, pressed flat and damp, was a splinter of pale wood, still wet. I didn't know then what it meant, only that I had crossed the threshold, and that Ashdown Hollow was waiting. The pale silver of wood, pressed between the pages of my journal, weighed heavier in my mind than any physical burden. I turned it over in my hands again and again, its texture smooth but strangely cold, as if it had been carved from something not quite wood, something older, colder, and more silent. I tried to push the dread aside, told myself that the forest played tricks on the mind, that my exhaustion was seeping into hallucination. But deep down, I just knew that what I had found was a warning. Ashdown Hollow had remembered me. The following morning was thick with fog, the kind that swallows the trees whole and muffles every sound. The markers continued, resolute and pale, cutting arcs and curves that no natural forest would hold. I followed them methodically, measuring angles, noting the subtle shifts in terrain. The air was damp, the soil heavy beneath my boots. Each step felt like crossing an invisible threshold, deeper into something ancient and unfathomable. The forest itself seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling a cold stillness that pressed against my skin. The moss underfoot glowed faintly, a phosphorescent green that pulsed with a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. I was not alone here. I could sense it with every hair on my neck, standing at attention. Every breath shallow and quick. The feeling of being watched had not left me. It had settled, patient, indifferent, almost like an old sentinel, waiting for me to uncover its secrets. That afternoon, I found more remnants, Fragments of broken posts, splinters like the one in my journal, scattered at the roots of twisted trees. Their pale surfaces seemed almost to drink in the fading light. And I swear I glimpsed faint scratches etched into the wood. Lines too fine and deliberate to be random. They formed patterns, but I could not decipher their meaning. As daylight waned, I made camp near a cluster of ancient pines. I lit a small fire, the flames fighting the encroaching gloom. But the shadows stretched long and strange, twisting into shapes that seemed to lurk just beyond the firelight. I pulled my journal close and reread the entries of the unknown surveyor. His words echoed in my mind, a refrain growing louder. The line, the circle, the pale figure without eyes. Who or what was this entity? And why did it haunt the boundaries? In the flickering light, I tried to imagine it, not as a monster, but as something else. Perhaps a guardian, a remnant of the forest itself, twisted by time and grief. I recalled old folktales from the region, whispered warnings about the spirits of those lost to the woods, watchers of places men were never meant to measure or claim. Some even spoke of pale men who marked the edges of reality, surveying not land, but memory and loss. As the night deepened, the fire crackled, and the wind sighed through the branches like a voice just out of hearing. Sleep came slowly that night. My dreams were invaded by that same snow-covered figure, gliding endlessly along the border, its hands tracing invisible lines in the frost. It never spoke, never acknowledged me beyond that weightless gaze. When I finally awoke, dawn was a thin grey wash over the forest. The markers lay before me like ghostly sentinels, untouched and eternal. I packed my things carefully, sensing that the forest had changed overnight. The path back was no longer clear. The trees had shifted, their branches knotted and unfamiliar. And even the compass in my hand quivered violently, spinning not in confusion but in warning. I walked on, deeper. The silence grew heavier, broken only by the faint scrape of something moving just beyond sight. A shifting underbrush, or a breath too slow to be human. And then I saw it. Not far off the path, in a clearing where the pale moss grew thickest, stood a figure. Its form was tall and slender, draped in a cloak of muted white, blending seamlessly with the fog and the ghostly light of the forest floor. It did not move, but its presence was undeniable, like a weight pressing on my chest. The creature's face was featureless. No eyes, no mouth, only smooth pale skin stretched over a shape both human and not. My body froze, caught between fear and awe. The figure seemed to watch me without watching, as if it existed in a plane just beside my own. It lifted a hand slowly and traced the air, drawing lines that shimmered faintly before fading into mist. I tried to speak to it, to ask it what it wanted, why it lingered here at the edge of the world. But no words came out of my mouth. After a while, the figure faded, dissolving into the fog as silently as it had appeared, leaving behind a silence deeper than before. And in its place, the markers glowed faintly, their pale surfaces humming with something ancient and unyielding. The forest grew quieter after that morning, as if the very air had been drained of sound and warmth. Still, I carried on, my steps slow and deliberate, the compass now useless. The markers were my only guide through this place that refused to be charted. Each marker seemed to pulse faintly beneath my touch, as though the forest itself breathed through them, tethered to something unseen and eternal. As I moved deeper into Ashdown Hollow, I felt less like a man and more like a ghost retracing footsteps, long since faded. The trees thickened, their branches knitting together in a canopy so dense that little light pierced the gloom. Shadows stretched and twisted, but there was no threat in them, only the endless, patient watching of something ancient. Then I came to the final marker, standing taller than the rest, its pale wood gleaming with an inner coldness. It was surrounded by stones, arranged in a rough circle, worn smooth by time, and inscribed with symbols I could not read but felt in my bones. The air here was stiller than still, heavier than heavy, as though the forest held its breath. I knelt beside the marker and laid my hand upon it. A shiver ran through me, not of cold, but of recognition. Memories not my own seeped into me, fragments of a past long buried beneath the soil. Men who had walked these woods centuries ago. Men who had tried to claim, to measure, to bind this place with lines and posts. They had failed. The forest had reclaimed them, and in turn passed on its burden to the pale sentinel who walks the borders. A guardian, cursed to mark the edges of something that cannot be owned. And I understood then that my survey was never meant to be completed. I was not here to map land, but to witness a promise, a vow etched in pale wood and silence, passed on from keeper to keeper, a promise to remember what men forget, that some places are not meant to be held, but only watched. The figure appeared beside me once more, as silent and pale as before. It raised its hand and pointed toward the horizon, where the trees began to thin and the sky bled faint light. The forest was ending, and My time here was ending with it. I rose slowly, leaving the marker standing as it had stood for centuries. I walked back toward the fading edge of Ashdown Hollow, and the forest seemed to exhale, releasing me from its grasp. The compass needle steadied. The birds began to sing again. The wind carried a soft murmur, like a farewell. I do not know what became of the pale surveyor before me, nor who will take up the mantle after I am gone. But I know this. Ashdown Hollow waits for no man, and some promises are kept only by those willing to walk the endless line between memory and oblivion. I will carry that promise with me, always.